Yeah.
So you asked for us to go over my argument again. I presume it's the 10 points about why Jehovah is.
Yeah.
So should I go ahead and put that on the screen and we'll just start talking about it?
Yeah. And
Cool. Okay.
specifically the point where I probably misinterpreted what you meant about all possible multiverses exist. Um,
Maybe. So
whereas,
for the audience's sake, I'll read the whole proof here real quick. So I should get that off the screen because that's not okay. So one, some things exist. Now, audience, I just want to let you know that each one of these points has an argument to back it up. So rather than go over the whole thing again like I did last time, I'm just going to read each of these points, but they each do have a backup to them. So one, some things exist. Two, harmony exists. Now, just to make it simple for the audience, I'm basically saying coexistence exists there. So I'm using harmony sort of as a synonym for coexistence. Three, all possible multiverses exist. Four, the universe exists. So that's the total of all possible multiverses. And then five, there is only one universe. Six, harmony is the power to exist. Seven, purpose exists. Eight, maximal harmony exists. Nine, the maximal purpose exists. So Jehovah is. And that's very drastically simplified. Okay, Snake, where would you like to begin?
so as far as all possible realms exist or multiverses exist, at the time I interpreted it as basically instead of possible, I guess I was thinking of actual, like like something may be possible but isn't actually true. Um,
Yeah, so
so
that's a
I agreed that all possible realms exist under the sense that like that it is that if it's possible it is actualized. Um, so I think that maybe that was causing some problems. Um,
so yeah, because I'm almost using possible and actual as equivalents because if all the possible things do exist, then anything that's possible is also actual. But I might be making sort of that style of argument where people, let me see, all things that are possible are actual. Oh yeah, that 100% probability of evolution because we are here. You know that argument that because we are here, the probability is 100%. I
mm-hmm.
might sort of be doing that with step three.
Yeah,
And what
because
do you?
it's I guess the distinction between like so a giraffe in the White House is possible, but is it actually true? So we can say we can't necessarily say all possible things are true, but if you're saying that if it's a universe that is possible, then it is a actual universe. If you're using possible to mean actual, then we can agree there. Um, I think you can obviously say all universes that aren't possible aren't real. So, but I don't think that it necessarily follows that all possible realms are necessarily actual.
So here's what I need to do: is I need to actually put that specific point on the screen. So okay, everyone. So here's how I made this point. And the first 2 points before it are pretty easy. Some things exist was easy to prove. Harmony exists is, like I said, it's sort of like saying coexistence exists. And so I think that's pretty easy to prove that if there are multiple things, then they coexist. And maybe it'll be simpler for me to just use the word coexistence instead of harmony. So I might revise this. But yeah, we have some things exist, coexistence exists, and then 3 is all possible realms exist. So let me see how I argue this. A, if a realm never has existed and never shall exist, it is impossible for that realm to exist. So that's sort of taking all of time and then switching the wording to present tense. But if it never exists for all of time, then it's not possible for it to exist now. B, all possible realms have existed and or shall exist. How do we know all possible realms will? Because if that's not the case, it's impossible for it to exist. So A supports B. Okay, C. From a trans-temporal perspective, that is outside of time, all possible realms exist. And
So I think from a deterministic perspective, this actually does make sense, since if it's like a supposedly possible thing that never actually manifested in reality from a determinist's perspective, then that was actually impossible. Like if a draft being in the White House, it's not geometrically, mathematically impossible, but it is, if it never actually happened, then the conditions that would have caused that to happen never existed, and thus it was an impossibility from a determinist perspective. So is that kind of what you mean? Because it doesn't seem like you're a determinist.
I think it would be simplest to say I'm a compatibilist. So, like, my free will is because, excuse me, yeah, if I can act truly as I want to, and based on who I truly am, then there's a lot of truth involved there. And that's what it takes for me to be free. And that involves God. So when I'm in God's will, like when God's puppet mastering me, that's when I'm freest. And people think like, well, if God's your puppet master, then you can't be free. But they're just totally misunderstanding who God is. And, God is some of the things he is. He's life, he's freedom, he's who we all have our being in. So it should be no surprise that our free will coincides with, and that if our will is not with God's will, that's when we're not free. And so in that way, I find compatibilism not only easy to believe, but just perfectly harmonious. Let me mention real quick to Chris Keith. Right now, it's a debate between Snake and myself. And so afterwards, if there's people who want to keep a lively chat going, I'd be really happy to do that. But no link right now. Okay, Snake.
All right. So are you saying that? So you're saying that the all possible things is something that either is or will be true?
All possible things either is or will be true.
Or just the definition of possible is that it was, is, or will be?
Well, I mean, it's more in... I mean, it kind of is exactly what it says on the screen. So, let's see. If a realm never has existed and never shall exist, it is impossible for that realm to exist. So yeah, this is sort of like stepping out and looking at it from God's perspective where you know everything. But I mean, I would attribute it more to like very fundamental logic is how we end up so close to that. So yeah, if a realm, or if anything never has existed and never shall exist, it is impossible for...
Well, so would you...
all possible realms have existed or shall exist. So which point of the argument is kind of weak, or how... Sorry, I just don't know how to answer your question.
I just think possible is ill-defined, and that's just... It's not really your fault, but... So would you say that
I
a
can address
like
that
a
real quick.
but would you say that a world that's populated primarily by giraffes, is that a possible realm?
Well, based on other things, not based on this argument, but especially not based on this step in the argument, but personally, I think it's incredibly unlikely. Um, my perception of God doesn't have like other universes with other Earths or anything. But to clarify about the definition real quick, possible in this proof, sort of the way it's used in the proof indicates how it's defined for the proof, if that makes sense.
Say again?
Well, the way the word possible is used in my proof, by hearing how it's being used, by hearing what I mean when I say it, that tells you what the definition is.
Uh, sort of. I can kind of infer from it.
Yeah, because
So you
the
don't.
argument is kind of a big entire argument, and I think you get where the entire argument is coming from. So I would have to rely on like you getting it. That means you can get what I mean by possible, because words are difficult, semantics and stuff. They're slippery and all that.
Yeah, so you're not including like hypotheticals that might be physically possible. You're just talking about something that has to have been caused at some point.
Yeah, I mean, this is on a very fundamental level here that it says if a realm never has existed and never shall exist, it is impossible for that realm to exist. And so that's almost, and then all possible realms have existed and or shall exist. I mean, I could almost say that those are, that what I'm saying here is defining possible. And so,
Yeah, like if premise B is like your definition, that
yeah,
would be different.
yeah, if premises A and B are true, then the word possible is being used correctly here, I guess makes sense or something. I mean, trying to dig so deep into a semantic is kind of difficult. I might do better like on where you think there's weak philosophy or something weak about my assessment of reality rather than being really hung up on word use. Because I thought of this, I thought of this as the most likely source of existence like 5 years ago. And then I went through one whole set of words trying to describe it maybe about a month ago or 2 months ago. No, about a month ago. And then that was really hard to follow and stuff, I thought. So then I wrote this one, which is a lot like more succinct and cleaner. And so it took me a long time to even have the words for this. So I can't pretend to have the perfect words now that I finally have words for it.
Yeah, I'm doing a similar thing with morality. Um, so
Yeah, if I can tie it in real quick to something we said in the last stream, because a lot of these people were here, I talked about thinking without words, abstract thought, and then connecting that with articulate conscious thought. Or actually, it's conscious abstract thought and subconscious thought. So you have conscious abstract, subconscious abstract, conscious articulate, and then I don't know if it's, I don't think we use our subconscious for us to articulate. So it'd be the three. You have the subconscious, art, you have the conscious articulate, the conscious abstract, and the subconscious abstract, and we can use those three together. So that's what I hear you saying, Snake, that you're kind of doing with your argument about morality, is you're kind of not at the place of words yet.
well, mostly it was hard to articulate, but I've found a few words like like the way I use freedom is pretty similar to the way you use harmony, and I kind of like it for that reason. Like it's kind of both derived from like this concept of things coexisting and not eliminating each other. Um, but
Yeah, you see, and freedom is so deep and spiritual, so different from that, that we can save that for a was the snake right argument.
yeah, yeah. Um, so,
So
so I totally agree with premise A, but it doesn't necessarily follow then that all possible realms have to exist. because there's this category where there's impossible realms and they don't exist, and then there's possible realms which exist and possible realms which don't exist. Under I guess
Yeah, I think
the layman definition, but I'm totally fine with as long as we make it absolutely clear by saying that the way you use possible here does not includes only those possible things that are true.
okay, so I think I follow what you're saying here, that my syllogism is not airtight. Let me check. If a realm has never has existed and never shall exist, it is impossible for that realm to exist. So for every realm that never has existed and never shall exist, so for every realm that never exists, it's impossible for it to exist. So then, if it is possible for a realm to exist, it cannot be a realm that never existed. So no, I'm solid on A and B. It's because that word impossible in A allows for B.
Okay, and this makes sense to me from a determinist perspective, and I guess I am a compatibilist too. So, yeah,
So
that makes sense. The problem though is when we get to basically what you're saying is the maximal possible thing. It seems like we're getting into hypotheticals versus actuals again, and so it's hard later on to distinguish between a possible that's hypothetical and a possible that's actual. Do you get what I'm saying? Like,
oh, that I have made it so that language can no longer discern between possible and actual because I've made them synonymous.
um, well, I
Yeah.
mean, if there's a better word for it, but it's hard. I don't know of a word that we could use for something that's hypothetical, which is physically possible but just never was
Oh,
caused.
oh yeah. You see, the only things that are physically possible are those things which are possible according to that which has the power to do physics into reality. You know, so they have to be spiritually possible to be physically possible. So there is technically no such thing as a hypothetical that's physically possible but not like logically possible. And so since this is like I'm trying to use logic here, I'm like trying to say that hypotheticals aren't really possible. We pretend they're possible to like explore hypothetics, right? But they're not actually possible. And then, I mean, you can do something. I mean, if something's only a hypothetical, it's. I mean, we're talking about. There's the difference between reality and talking about things. So this proof is very much about reality, and so all the vocab within this proof, it's necessary that within the proof, it makes sense, but it's not trying to set what the definition should be for words other places. So like this just doesn't address the hypothetical. So I don't need to have that ability in my vocab for the proof because you can see right here on step 3, I've cut right past the hypothetical.
Well, I
So
think that becomes a problem when you're talking about the maximal purpose or maximal harmony because we don't actually know what that is.
yeah, so let's go look at that. I mean, did you want to go through real quick and have me read these to see if you object to any points, or do you just remember it well enough? You just want to have a discussion?
Well, the possible was the only thing that I looked back on and said I should have said something, and then the rest of it I didn't have a problem with until I think point 8 or something, wherever
Okay.
you say the maximal purpose is Jehovah.
Here, I think I've kind of made a mistake with this. I should have just read it real quick. because there's all these people who weren't there for the first debate. So I'm just going to read the entire thing through, and then we're gonna be on the last step when I'm done, and that's what you want to discuss now. So we'll get there.
Okay.
So, okay, audience, here's what Snake and I have been talking about this whole time. I already read you the full 10 steps together. So I'm just going to take you through this now. 1, some things exist. A, oh wait, let me check how it looks like on screen share real quick before I do the whole thing. Okay, and I'm just going to make it bigger. Make it bigger. Okay, 1, some things exist. So I prove this with A, you experience, so you are an experiencer thing. B, some of what you experience are a thing or things other than the experiencer thing which you are. C, there are at least 2 things. 1, some things exist. 2, harmony exists. A, if a thing is eliminated by something else, then first said thing no longer exists. B, some things do not eliminate some other things. C, to not eliminate some other things can be simultaneously reciprocal. D, I will label that reciprocation as harmony. E, if any things exist, then harmony exists. 2, harmony exists. And this should, I think, technically say if some things exist, then harmony exists. Okay, 3, all possible realms exist. A, if a realm never has existed and never shall exist, it is impossible for that realm to exist. B, all possible realms have existed and or shall exist. C, from a trans-temporal perspective, all possible realms exist. 3, all possible realms exist. 4, the universe exists. A, if there are multiple possible realms, then they are in harmony with one another. So there is a realm of all realms, which is the universe. 4, the universe exists. And that does make sense, because being not in harmony is when they eliminate each other. So if they don't eliminate each other, they are in harmony. So yeah, 4, the universe exists. 5, there is only one universe. A, there is only one universe. The universe may be multiversal, yet remains one. 5, there is only one universe. 6, harmony is the power to exist. A, the measure of harmony is best described as quantitative measure of power to exist. And again, I'm just going to admit right here in a mathematical sense, some of this might be a little bit of a mess. But I'm doing my best with words here. So yeah, the measure of harmony is best described as quantitative measure of power to exist. B, it is likely that greater harmony results in patterns which then serve to simplify a system, so that quantitative measure of power to exist cannot be measured via measuring how much computational processing power is required to describe the details of the system. 6, harmony is the power to exist. Okay, that B right there is just to that's very technical. We don't really have to go into that. 7, purpose exists. A, purpose is the quality that a system of harmony will reach a greater measure of harmony. B, it is possible for purpose to exist. C, all possible realms exist. I'm not sure I even follow this proof. 7, purpose exists. So let me see this real quick. Well, I'm just going to read it to you guys. 8, the maximal harmony exists. A, maximal harmony is maximal power to exist. 8, the maximal harmony exists. 9, the maximal purpose exists. A, all possible realms exist. B, the greater maximal purpose, the greater the maximal purpose, the greater the maximal power to exist, the more likely the existence thereof. Okay, C, the likelihood of the existence of maximal purpose is maximally likely. And I wrote not a play on words. 9, maximal purpose exists. So then here's the entire proof. Some things exist. Harmony exists. All possible multiverses exist. The universe exists. There is only one universe. Harmony is the power to exist. Purpose exists. Maximal harmony exists. The maximal purpose exists. So the conclusion is Jehovah is. I wrote it here at 10 as 1 is victorious. So that's of all the possible multiverses, 1 is victorious, I think is the main meaning of those words. A, it is possible for one proposition of possible existence to be the maximal of purpose, and so to have and be the one supreme power to exist. This would surely be the fact of all factuality. B, the maximal possible transtemporal measure of purpose of a system is of greater maximum. Okay, I gotta start B over again. B, the maximal possible temporal measure of purpose of a system is of greater maximum if the dynamics of maximal purpose synergize through the universe of maximal possible harmony. So that's sort of like saying the better starting point when multiplied by the better starting point of harmony when multiplied by purpose will be that maximal possible result, which is the one that exists. It's the most likely to exist. I've already proven that. C, the maximal possible is maximal enough to not be supplemented or added to by any other proposed possibilities of existence. 10, 1 is victorious. Okay, so here's 11 is Jehovah is. So this is where, Snake, you are, I believe this is where we're at, that you think I'm using the word possible to sneak something in here maybe, or where are we at?
Well, it's partially what you just mentioned was maximally likely to exist, is we don't actually know that what you're saying is the maximal purpose. We don't know that concept actually exists. And that's the entire point of this whole syllogism, so I think that's probably a problem.
Well, the whole point was that the syllogism is proving that this maximal concept exists. So then...
well, the maximal does exist, I'll agree with that, but what that is, we don't know.
Okay, so do you have a problem? I don't think you have a problem with the word harmony, at least not yet, but do you have a problem with how I bring purpose into it?
Nope. Mostly just possible, because it's just the way that it gets confusing, like with deterministic properties. Like, is it possible to get a penguin to the moon? Yes, but is anyone ever going to do it? No, so then it's not possible under determinism, but you could do it if someone wanted to, at least if
Now,
if NASA wanted to.
is there anywhere within this proof that these issues have anything to do with anything?
Yeah, because if you say that, because basically what you're doing is imagining a hypothetical maximal and then saying that that exists simply because I don't actually know why. It seems like you just declare that Jehovah is the maximally likely or maximally possible purpose.
Okay, so it sounds like in a lot of ways, generally, you find this whole thing fair. So, I mean, was it fair all the way through step 9? The likelihood of the existence of maximal purpose is maximally likely, not a play on words. Okay, so, I mean, was
Yeah,
it?
I mean, whatever it is, that's what it is, and it exists.
So
The
then we
question
go.
is, what is it?
So when I go to step 10 and I say that 1 is victorious and I specify down to only 1 instead of the whole multiverse thing, um, then what do you think of that?
I think
So,
it's fair that you could derive that everything that is true is derived from some singular fact.
so getting to the oneness part is fine. So then let me go ahead and read Jehovah is to the audience in full, and then we'll see if this can get to where you're still irked by this. Okay, Jehovah is A. The maximal harmony and maximal purpose are possibly most maximal if they are the maximally intelligent. I'm just going to take out possibly. Okay, so the maximal harmony and maximal purpose are most maximal if they are the maximally intelligent, maximally intuitive, transcendent, maximally factual, abstractly disembodied, beyond mental, beyond physical, beyond personal, fact of fact. B. The maximally likely source of the universe is that entity with maximal harmony and maximal purpose. Jehovah is. And then what the audience is missing is the definition of Jehovah from the Bible. But I don't think we need to dig into that right now. I think Snake is tracking with me. And you guys can kind of also, even without me giving that definition.
Yeah, point A is definitely where I think I follow up until that point.
Again, this is where we
So
came last time. And I think we just disagreed, but we'll see if we can't like drill to the core of it
yeah,
more or something. So what are you thinking?
again, it's just I think that well, if you're going to take out possibly here, I still think that it's kind of assuming that it's an act. This thing that you describe as maximally intelligent, etc., is an actual entity, and we have no idea. You even admitted last time that you can't prove that this maximal purpose is intelligent, which I think is the linchpin of basically what would be the argument. Because if you could prove that this maximal purpose had intelligence, I think that you would be proving a god.
You see, and that's where it's sort of opposite. Is like, I know that the structure of this is a logical syllogism, and maybe if I was to make it really complete, I would have to be careful with making precepts and restructuring it some and stuff. But although the structure of it's a logical syllogism, I'm more being like down to earth with it, you know? So like for me, the maximally intelligent, that's not something I need to prove. By me putting that there, it made the argument stronger. I mean, that's the way I see it. But I am willing to talk about it a little more and try to explain why I say that, which I don't think I was able to do last time. We'll see if I can do that now.
Well,
So
It's just that
Um,
these are just hypothetical things that a maximal thing might have, but we don't know if it does have it.
okay, well, let me ask you what your opinion is. I like if um, if an entity is an entity of harmony and purpose. Oh, now if an entity is an entity of harmony and purpose, then if it had the maximal intelligence, so I mean we're talking about something that's potentially fundamentally different from our intelligence in some ways. You know, we're talking about whatever maximal intelligence means. So if that entity of harmony and purpose, that up to step 9 or even up to step 10, you agreed there's like that one, you know, we're kind of at agreement with that one, so we can sort of use that word to talk to each other, hopefully. So would that one not be, what's your opinion about that one if it's not maximally intelligent versus if it is maximally intelligent? Because I don't see why you object to that.
Well, I have no idea how we could show that it has any intelligence.
Well, I'm not, this isn't an empirical observation, though. This is a logical proof.
So how do we know that it has intelligence through the proof?
Oh, well, I just, because the one that exists has maximal purpose and maximal harmony. And if it does not have maximal intelligence, then it's not fulfilling all of that maximality. But the one that does fulfill all of the maximality is more likely to exist. So the intelligence gives it more maximality. So it's more likely to exist than one without intelligence. And my argument here, you know, what is most likely to exist fundamentally does exist. If we were to assess everything, we would discover that perfect likelihood of its existence, you know?
Well, this is where the hypothetical possible and the actual possible comes in, because we can have a hypothetical idea of a god or a hypothetical idea of something that has a maximal uh, x whatever value to it, but that doesn't mean that it's an actualized. Like, we could say that if we got a penguin to the moon, that's the maximally high penguin. It has achieved the maximal distance from Earth among the entire set of penguins. But the problem is that that's just a hypothetical penguin. And yes, that penguin would be more maximally high if it was on the moon, but we haven't established that if. We don't, I mean, we can be fairly certain that there is no such penguin based on NASA information, but that would be the same with God, because in order for you to show that something is maximal and maximally possible, I guess with your usage of the word, we have to show that it exists or at some point will or has existed. So that's a prerequisite for what we're talking about with a maximal. So there is the hypothetical maximal versus the actual maximal.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out how to work with that or understand where the problem is. So, because this proof starts from like the blank slate, it doesn't, you know, with the observation being, well, it does start with the observation of ourselves existing. And so it sort of has that I think, therefore I am sort of beginning. But besides that, that's about all that it has. So
Well, but is
really,
there
there's nothing established here. So why would we expect these things to be established? Or then you would think I should just remove them because they're not established. So this really is, I think, just a matter of disagreement. All I can think is that my case is stronger with those words maximally intelligent in there. Like, if I try to say it's not the maximally intelligent one, someone will be like, well, I agree with you with all those except I add maximal intelligence. And then their argument becomes better than mine. And so it just makes the argument better. So I'm still, even though there's this issue you're having that I haven't like logically proven it, I'm not trying to say I've proven maximally intelligent. I guess I'm using it as a presupposition that I'm using as a presupposition that maximal intelligence would increase maximal purpose and maximal harmony. And I think it's a good presupposition, and using it, I think, strengthens my argument. So I guess that's where I have to go with that. As far as the way you're dissecting it, I'd have to say it's a presupposition, but because I use it, my argument is stronger. Like knowing that the argument uses that presupposition, the person who hears it, they know that the presupposition's true. So they're like, oh, look, it's using a true presupposition. This is a strong argument. So that's why it says maximally intelligent. And I'd like to hear your response, but we may end up agreeing to disagree. I don't know.
Well, it's like, can you say that for any other maximal quality that you're trying to prove? Like, pick any analogy for anything. I'll just stick with the penguin on the moon thing. Whereas being on the moon would increase the maximal height of that penguin. But that doesn't mean that therefore it exists.
Here is penguins' existences aren't dependent on whether or not they're even higher. Like the penguin being higher does not make it more likely to exist. But here, these maximal properties do make it more likely to exist.
That would be an argument for necessity. You're just saying that it increases their maximality, but what you're actually describing, it sounds like, is that these qualities are necessary for the one to exist, for anyone to exist.
That I'm saying it's necessary for maximal intelligence? No, it's just that we could call it a war of possibility, of potentials, to see which potential exists. And that's what we could do, is we could use potential instead of possible, I guess. I mean, it's not the same, but anyway, that's what I'm doing now.
But I mean, you just can't use the same argument for anything else. A maximally large whale, well, it's just as large as the largest whale, and we can say that we can just
make a whale more likely to exist. That's the
right.
whole thing. Like, the likelihood is increased the more these maximal qualities go, but that's not true with the height of a penguin or with the size of a whale.
I don't think you can say that the likelihood increases just because it's more maximally anything.
Well, that's the argument that I made down to one is victorious. It sounded like you were pretty okay with.
Well, because you said that the likelihood of existence of maximal purpose is maximally likely. And the way that that's phrased is true. Because whatever the maximal is 100% likely. The likelihood is 1. Just because it is what exists. But there's no way to apply that to a hypothetical maximal. You have to know what the actual one is in order to state that. So the likelihood of the actual existence is 1, but we have no idea which is the actual maximal. We have a bunch of hypotheticals, but I don't...
I think the issue is that we're actually discussing that thing that is the basis of everything. And so it is its own basis. So then this argument is special in that way, that this argument is all about something that's its own basis, whereas no other argument will ever be about something that's its own basis. You know, everything else is based in this one thing. And so that really makes it a very unique topic to discuss. So you end up with what could be called special pleading, but it's rightful special pleading because it's such a special circumstance. And it's not even special pleading. I mean, I'm sure someone could outline why it's done that way.
Why is it okay to do it for God, but not for any other maximal property?
Well, if you have another maximal property that makes something more likely to exist, the more that's maximized, you know, then, and if that's something that you would be able to put a property into words like that, that sounds very difficult to do.
Well, its maximality isn't what makes it likely to exist. Its possibility is what makes it likely to exist, or its actuality is what makes it likely to exist. Because something's not the most maximally strong person is just whatever is possible. You can imagine a stronger person, but that doesn't make the stronger person more likely to exist.
Okay, I do totally track with you now. And then, so you're still, if I admitted that maximally intelligent, I could bring that as a presupposition, or I think I didn't really word it that way, but for me, so are you disagreeing with my presupposition that maximal intelligence would increase the maximal harmony and purpose? Or are you disagreeing that maximal harmony and purpose are? I don't think you can disagree with that part because that's the 10 steps we just went through and got to the one that's victorious, right?
I disagree with the fact that if you declare that exists just because it's most maximal, hypothetically.
Well, I declare that it exists because it's more likely to exist than anything else that exists.
But the likelihood is based on its maximal properties, but those maximal properties are entirely hypothetical.
Yeah, or is it the maximal properties are a label for the fact that it exists? And so then I add, I say, well, I see what exists. I'm going to label its harmony maximal harmony, because if there was greater harmony, that would exist instead. I'll label its purpose as maximal purpose, because if there's greater purpose, that would exist instead. And if it has intelligence or not, it has maximal intelligence, because otherwise the one with maximal intelligence would exist instead. And then the question, what is maximally intelligent for an entity like this? And I think that would be the maximal intelligence of all, And so yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at. It's just like, it's got to be the maximal one, because otherwise the one that is maximal will outdo it. Because we're at a very fundamental level here, so I don't see where you're getting these limits. Like,
well, do you recognize that you can't do that for any other trait?
Yeah, I recognize that we're talking about a very special circumstance, specifically about likelihood to exist. And so it is different than anything else that can't have the same argument attached to its likelihood to exist, Like, I can't, if it was increasing its size, I couldn't say, look, by finding a way that it's increased, then yeah, that hypothetical one is bigger, right? If I make the hypothetical whale bigger, it's a bigger hypothetical whale. If I make the hypothetical penguin higher, it's a higher hypothetical penguin.
But that doesn't make it more likely, though, right?
Yeah, but here I am saying that if I make this hypothetical realm, this hypothetical source of the universe, or this hypothetical universe, if I make it more likely, then it's more likely. So like the penguin being higher would be higher. The hypothetical penguin, if it's higher, is higher. The hypothetical whale, if it's bigger, it's bigger. The hypothetical possibility, if it's more likely, is more likely. So I think that's where we're at.
But what makes it more likely?
Well, there's the first 10 points.
Is it
and like I make it even stronger here on point 11.
I don't see how you get to more likely, though, just because it's more maximal. Because that's you just...
Well, it's maximal specifically in harmony and purpose. It's not just some vague maximal, like using the concept of quantity or math or something. It's not exactly the same thing as that. It's kind of trying to stick to, the coexistive properties, and, purpose being that those coexistive properties increase with time. So you have this, that way it's ballooning and getting bigger. So that gives you that more potential maximum,
You have a larger potential maximal, but does it actually exist?
Well, because
just because it has more of an intense quality doesn't mean that it necessarily exists.
Okay, so if it has the more maximal harmony makes it more likely to exist, and the more maximal purpose makes it more likely to exist.
But
So in
how?
those senses, it's the more likely, the hypothetical that's more likely is more likely. Well, isn't that what the first 10 points were that we agreed on? So are we now looking back in the proof somewhere to disagree?
No, I don't think that's what you were saying at all.
Let me see. It just
Or
that's exactly what I think I'm talking about. I thought I was pretty detailed about it.
okay, so
Uh,
point 8 premise B maybe uh I think you said the greater the maximal purpose, the greater the maximal power to exist, the more likely the existence. Um okay, yeah, I think I would have to disagree with that. I don't disagree with point C.
so on 9 here,
Yeah,
what are on screen now?
premise B.
The greater the maximal purpose, the greater the maximal power to exist, the more likely the existence thereof. Okay, if this was a chronological entity, that would make no sense, but this is a trans-temporal entity, and so it makes perfect sense.
So God is more likely to exist where he's more maximal,
Well,
or
the
when he's more
maximal
maximal.
the maximal purpose is that increasing of harmony, that increasing of coexistiveness. Um, because I defined purpose as a process of dynamics of the harmony increasing. And so the maximal purpose means that in an eternal sense or in an infinite time sense, either way, that's going to increase your maximal harmony and maximal power to exist. So if it was chronological, you could be like, well, the starting point doesn't know the future, so it doesn't have a factor. But this entire thing is trans-temporal. I don't think I ever stepped into time in this proof.
Well, I think here's another problem of actual versus hypothetical is like I like point C where it's because it says the likelihood of the existence is maximally likely, which is 1. Um,
Well, it's of the existence of maximal purpose specifically is maximally likely.
yeah, and that just means whatever it is basically what it is. Whatever the maximal height of a tree is maximally likely because it does exist. But when you're getting into hypotheticals, you can say, well, I can conceive of a taller tree, therefore that tree is more likely. We can't make that
No, that
leap.
tree is more tall. That's the difference here. You see, in my argument, it's more likely, but in your argument, it's just more tall.
The hypothetical one is more tall. Whichever one actually exists is more likely.
Yeah, but there's nothing about a hypothetical tree being taller that makes a hypothetical tree more likely. And so
Exactly.
we're kind of repeating ourselves here because
But how is a hypothetical God being more maximally intelligent make it more likely?
okay, well, that's because it increases. You see, and I could maybe try to word it
Or
differently.
a 1, I mean.
Not to cheat you here, but just communicating. That if it was worded a bit differently here at the end, let's see, where we have maximally intelligent. You see, so you're asking, so we went back to the intelligence, right? You just asked me why would maximally intelligent be more likely? Is that what you asked me?
Yeah. How
Okay, and then
how does any maximal how does
it
how
for
does
more harmony.
increasing the maximality increase likelihood for anything?
Well, increasing the maximum intelligence increases the maximum purpose and harmony. And yeah, we can sort of work this backwards here. So
Hypothetically, though.
when the purpose and harmony, yeah, but that increases the likelihood of the hypothetical. You see, the likelihood of existence, we're talking about likelihoods a lot here. Like your tree, we're talking about height of the tree, but I'm talking about the likelihood. And so, yeah, the maximal does increase the likelihood.
But not for the tree.
Well, yeah, not for the tree. That's the whole point, right? You're talking about the hypothetical being taller. I'm talking about the hypothetical being if the hypothetical
Well, so
has
couldn't
more intelligence.
then
If
couldn't
this
we say
hypothetical,
so like with multiverse theory versus the universe, just a single universe theory? We can say, well, the multiverse has a more maximal number of universes inside of it, so therefore it's more likely to exist. I don't think that follows.
yeah, so then that would be where we would maybe disagree about there being one is victorious. Going from, because my idea is that, and what does one is victorious mean and how I worded it here? Do you mind if I read it again? Um,
Sure. Go ahead.
it is impossible for one proposition of possible exist. It is possible for one proposition of possible existence to be the maximal of purpose, and so to have and be the one supreme power to exist. This would surely be the fact of all factuality. Okay, so I don't really get to one universe. I get to one fact of all factuality. And so, yeah, so I guess I don't really disprove the multiverse anywhere here. But,
Well, I mean, I know how you use it a little differently, but
well,
just to
and
keep
this,
giving analogies, like there's nothing you can say just because the hypothetical has a more maximal quality than some other hypothetical doesn't make one more or less likely than the other.
I'm sorry, I did miss that. Could you just repeat it real quick, or the
Yeah,
best anyway? Sorry.
for any given object or concept that is hypothetical, just because one might have a more maximally greater quality than some other hypothetical object or concept, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's more likely to exist.
Okay, but
And I think you understand that with everything except for God.
What?
And I think you understand that point applied to everything except for God or the One.
Well, why aren't you getting my point that you're talking about a maximally highest tree? I mean, when I get to maximal harmony and maximal purpose, maybe I need to switch my language somewhere to maximally likely so that it's just like really blatant here in how it's written. Because really what I'm getting at is that, like, yeah, because if I can word the argument somewhere here where you're forced to accept that you're talking about, uh, maximal likeliness. So that's sort of the idea, is that I've proven what maximal likeliness is. So when I say that the hypothetical has maximal likeliness, that's not the same as saying it has maximal height. Like, maximal likeliness does make it more likely. So the question is, have I proven that? And I could word it more in a way that forces it to just be faced that way. But what do you think? I have not proven that what's maximally likely is like maximally that what's what's maximally likely is maximally likely. It's kind of that easy. But I've connected that with harmony and purpose and intelligence and stuff, and I'm still not following why you disagree, or why you don't see that. I've attached it to likelihood. So these examples about taller trees, higher penguins, bigger whales, for me, that's more likely likelihood. You see what or a more likely entity. So a more likely entity is more likely. A taller entity is taller. So we're talking about a more likely hypothetical. So can you tell me where the more likely breaks down for you? Is it just at intelligence? Is it at harmony or purpose? I think a moment ago we were here at step 8 or step 9.
Well, whatever it is, whatever the maximal is what is likely. But we don't know what qualities that it has or how maximal its qualities are. You seem to be saying that the more maximal its hypothetical qualities, the more maximal its likelihood.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. You see, because all we have to work with is hypothetical, because this is something that we don't have empirical proof on. And so if we're in the hypothetical, then our best argument is for the most likely hypothetical. So if I can make my hypothetical maximally likely, then I think it's fair that I've won the argument.
But how are you making it maximally likely?
Well, I tried to make that
Just
case. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you think I failed, I think it's pretty solid. I mean, you haven't shown me anywhere that I think it's weak.
yeah, I think because you say whatever. Do you say it's more likely in point 11? The
Point
maximally
11.
likely source of the universe is that entity with maximal harmony and maximal purpose. But
Yeah.
then you say that this purpose has to include intelligence.
Well,
For
that just
starters.
the argument, because anyone reading this will be like, "Oh yeah, I would have those qualities more if it had more intelligence." And if they don't think that, then I mean, what can I do, right? Because I can't fix stupid. But
Well,
this maximally intelligent statement is very good. And if someone's being smart and honest and reasonable and has some good philosophy and stuff, they're going to agree with me on it.
no,
So that's
no.
honestly where I stand, unless you can convince me otherwise, or you haven't really given me any reason why it's weak. You're just trying to keep questioning it. And
Yeah,
I
because you
see
can't do this for anything else.
it's
You're
strong.
making an exception for this one God. So
Well, I already
the
explained
like
that.
the whatever the maximal harmony and maximal purpose is just what it is, and it doesn't. It could be lower than in having intelligence. So
Yeah, but that's not.
you're still mixing the hypothetical with the actual in point A.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's just that, like, that's fine. It's just that it's not as strong an argument as mine. So you can say that this isn't a 100% foolproof, but as far as I can tell, it's the best. And so, yeah, I mean, at this point, I'd be like, okay, let me hear a better proposition and we'll see which one wins or whatever, but I'm still happy with this one.
I don't. It doesn't prove anything though.
Okay, well, I mean, I think it has proven itself to be the best argument. And so, I mean, if better than any other possibility isn't good enough for you, that's fine with me.
But you said it's a bad argument applied to anything else.
Well, I mean, to say that a hypothetical tree being taller makes it more likely is not true, but to say a hypothetical entity being more likely makes it more likely is true. And so I'm not going to
That's just a
refute that again. I
tautology.
mean, what?
That's just a tautology. If it's more likely, then it's more likely. Yes.
Yeah, but you're just making a false equivocation. So I shouldn't have to use
It's
tautology. You should just see it for what it is.
it's not because you're arguing that the more maximal, it is more maximal if it has maximal intelligence, etc., etc. So this one has more maximal harmony and power to exist, and more maximal likelihood if it has these qualities, maximal
Yeah,
intelligence,
I'd be
etc.
down to like discuss these. Like, why do you think maximal intelligence wouldn't do that? I mean, because I put it there to make the argument stronger. I'm trying to make the strongest argument I can. If I take it out, the argument becomes weaker. So
No,
do you
it
think,
doesn't.
okay, so, and you think that's because, well, okay, so would you explain that to me? Because I think that's not reasonable.
Because if you say that a more maximally intelligent hamster would have more harmony and
Wait,
more purpose, therefore the most maximally, therefore a hamster as smart as a human exists, because it would be more maximally great.
well, I didn't use the standard argument that other people used. I used my own words. I never used the word great once in this.
Sure, it would
But
have more maximal harmony and purpose.
or maybe I do mention greatness earlier. No, I don't think I do in this one. I don't think I use vastness in this one. But yeah, my point is that like we're still talking about increasing the likelihood. But Now, let me explain why I think intelligence makes it stronger. I know I said I'd do that earlier and I failed, but I think I kind of have it now. Intelligence describes a process of being able to take information and put a purpose to it. And so the definition of intelligence does mean that maximal intelligence increases the maximal purpose. And so I'm totally fine with having it there.
Well, having an intelligence equal to a human's increases the maximal purpose of a hamster. Therefore, a hamster with a human intelligence exists.
Well, it would have greater purpose, but it would not have greater likelihood.
Exactly. So likelihood is not connected to how maximal its qualities are.
I mean, the thing is that a hamster cannot. Well, I mean, hmm. The maximal purpose of the most maximal if they are maximally intelligent. So I think you're breaking through to me. I mean, I'm sure I'm still going to disagree with you afterwards, but if you can sort of try to hammer into me again.
Yeah, I mean, if we have the 1 and we just make that an x, we can put anything there, and the argument should be able to hold. So if we
so we're talking about. Well, sorry, I was just asking you to help me, so that's why I'm interrupting. Because we're talking about this hamster
yeah,
having like if it has more purpose, according to my argument, it's more likely to exist because more purpose is more likelihood to exist. But that's only in the case of this entity. That's just taking it out of context. I spent 10 previous points setting the context for why point 11 can be talked about this way. And so, well, yeah, that's my response.
so what's so special about this entity that allows it to kind of break that argument?
It's very special to be the one, which, like I said earlier, we should maybe be able to use the word one to communicate. So I just did.
So
It's very special.
if we added the premise, it's very special. Would that change the argument about the hamster?
You asked me what's so special about this, and I cited the entire argument coming to this one. That word one indicates something special, especially in context of this argument. So, I mean, hopefully you get what I'm jiving at there. You said, what's so special about this entity that it's worthy of the special pleading? And that's where this one comes in, and the entire argument leading up to it.
Just because it's special doesn't mean that it's deserving of special pleading, though.
Well, I mean, you asked me why it's special, so what did you mean by that?
It has some special qualities, sure, and so with the hamster, it would have special qualities, but they're not relevant to how this argument works.
I would say it's the special context that's relevant to how the argument works. This is the context of the fundaments of existence, from nothing except observing the universe from our consciousness. And so,
but how does that's
not the same context as hamsters. Hamsters are born through biology, but the universe is not born. Existence itself is not. It does not exist because of biology. So it's just a different context. The context here would be like what. I don't know what this kind of philosophy is called, but I wish Smokey could just tell me what I want to say right now because he has this stuff more book smarted than I do. But yeah, the context of a hamster existing is totally different than the context of the universe existing. So you're really using a lot of false equivocation. I don't know if you can stop using false equivocation and just get direct to it. Why you dislike the argument?
Well, it's not a false equivocation in any way, shape, or form. You just say that it's has these special qualities, but I'm not seeing
how would a hamster fit into my first 10 steps of the proof and then be the one that's in context of the 11.
It doesn't have to. You're saying that.
Well, except that this is the 11th step of an 11-step proof. It's not just the first step.
Yeah, you're saying that something that has a more maximal purpose is more likely if it has more maximal purpose. It doesn't matter what it is.
Well, no, it's in this context. So, I mean, I guess
So
I should have said
only
that right away, but I've never done this before, you know? But now that you and I are really butting heads on this, I'm like, the context doesn't really allow for any of these trees or whales or penguins or hamsters, but it does allow for a universe, you know? So, I mean...
Well, you say that, but I don't... Like, where... Maybe you want to amend it, but where does that... Where can we say that the one is more likely to exist because it has more maximal purpose?
Okay,
as opposed to all other things where that argument fails.
yeah, we already focused on this point. I believe it was here. Excuse me real quick. Okay, okay, maximal purpose. Purpose exists. Okay, all possible realms exist. The greater the maximal purpose, the greater the maximal power to exist, the more likely the existence thereof. So the reason maximal purpose, because the definition of purpose here is that the harmony increases, that the dynamics, the harmony is unto increase. And so the more of that increase, the more harmony you have. So that's why purpose does that. And the reason this definition of purpose does fit later is because a mind would still improve this kind of purpose. Like minds defined as sorting like information and awareness and stuff into more purpose. That's what a mind does. And so that would still work for this kind of purpose.
But you agree that
is connected to the increase in harmony. So if you're okay with that harmony, you should be okay with this purpose. And then you should be okay with the intelligence.
The intelligence is where it breaks down. So do you agree that this premise B here does not work for anything else?
Greater than maximum.
It doesn't work for hamsters, it doesn't work for trees, it doesn't work for penguins or islands.
Okay, it actually does. It's just that all true purpose is in God. And so God decides those purposes. So you can't just hypothetically a different one because God already did.
So if I propose a hamster with more maximal purpose, that hamster is more likely to exist?
Yes, but in this context, its purpose would be held in God. So those hamsters do exist. But
what?
And then, so you would want to say that if it's more maximally intelligent, it would have more maximally purpose. That's where the context doesn't work. So yeah, I mean, I do see there actually is a lot of technical nitty-gritty to get into with this. It's kind of fun. I hope the people in the audience are interested in it because we're really nitty-gritty here, really technical. So good night, Honesty Angel. Thanks for being here. And I'm mostly not reading chat, just so everyone knows I can't multitask like that. So yeah, the purpose is held in God, and then the step 11 requires the context of the rest of the argument. So that's how I would parse those.
I mean, but that's just begging the question, is you're using God to prove God.
Okay, when I say the purpose is held in God, am I then using... Well, no, I'm just making it clear why the argument still is not self-refuting when I discuss with you that the purpose is in God. Like, that deals with the hamster, right? But I don't need any of that for this argument. The hamster doesn't actually come into this argument. That's just an equivocation you're bringing in.
So if it's a false equivocation, then we can agree that premise B does not hold true for hamsters?
Well, I'm saying that in this context, that you could say that that's a fair equivocation, but it's still an equivocation. It's still not actually in the argument. But when we get to step 11, where intelligence comes in, that wouldn't apply to the hamster because that's not how the purpose of hamsters works. But the source of purpose and the judge of purpose is this mind. But like I say, like I only have to say all this because someone attempted to bring a refutation in, and I'm saying how the argument is sound with itself. So I'm not sure if this somehow disproves my argument. I want to be really honest about it if it does somehow weaken my argument. So am I begging the question by saying that this purpose, that I define purpose as being held in God as far as discussing whether or not a hamster would be in this role? But it is simpler to just, for this argument, just to call it false equivocation, maybe. That depends on if a hamster can qualify for the preceding steps. So that's the more right way to go about this. Let's see. That was part of prove the maximal purpose. The greater the maximal purpose, the greater the maximal potential to exist. Yeah, you see, purpose in this proof is defined around harmony in this proof. And harmony in this proof is coexistive power. And so, in that sense, yeah, anything that would put the hamster on a trajectory for increasing coexistive power. So it's not its own source of existence. So changing its qualities does not change the qualities of its source of existence. But what I'm describing is its own source of existence. So when I change the qualities of what I'm describing, I am changing the qualities of its likelihood. Even though it's a hypothetical, what it means is my hypothetical is improving. So it's not like I can speak something into existence by making a better argument. As my hypothetical gets better, so does my argument.
But hypotheticals aren't actuals. So
yeah. So I just want to make sure we catch.
Just because you can imagine something more maximal, doesn't mean it exists.
Yeah, and just on this point, real quick about purpose. Yeah, so purpose in this is defined according to harmony in this, and yeah, you see, if a hamster was responsible for its own power to exist, then it could fit into this. But the reason all these other things are false equivocation is they are not the source of their own power to exist. But the thing I'm arguing is the source of its own power to exist. So if I change my hypotheticals about the thing, I can improve the likelihood of my hypothetical in that way. And so, yeah, I do have to say those are all false equivocations. The reason is because they are not their own source of existence. And so the effects of likelihood in those cases is not equivocal to the effects of likelihood here. Hopefully that made enough sense how I said that.
So I think you should at least add in somewhere where the one is its own power to exist, and therefore this point, premise B is true for the one.
Okay, so I should add this into my proof where, well, I mean, do I need to add into my proof something that's simply declaring what's a false equivocation? I don't mean that in a rude way. I just mean that very honestly. Like, I should be ready to say, well, that's false equivocation for this reason, but should that be accounted for in the proof or not? What do you think?
Well, I think it should, because taken on its own, just the soundness of that one premise, it's not sound on its own.
Well, it is.
But if you argue that for some, I don't think you can, but I think it's a necessary but not a sufficient argument where you need to put this is true, this premise B is true because the one is its own power to exist.
Oh, so it would just be like somewhere within the commas or in something at point B or something like that. So,
Maybe.
yeah, I see exactly what you mean. The greater the maximal purpose, the greater the maximal power to exist. Well, no, because that's, you see, it came to a matter of defining purpose really well. And then it came to a matter of recognizing that we're talking about something that is its own source of existence. So I'm still not seeing how I would add this into the proof. I do see how I need to be ready to talk about it, but can you be more specific?
Well, it's just because that argument is not sound on its own, and you're
Which
saying
argument?
premise B.
Premise B. Based on the definition of purpose here, it is valid on its own. Oh wait, let me see again.
Well, not you're saying not with hamsters and not with
Oh
other
well,
things.
not without presupposing God as part of the definitions and stuff. That's right. So I got to get out of that mind frame. I was stuck on my earlier. It's interesting because this isn't really like I'm changing anything, but the perspectives are like it's the exact same thing, but coming at it from different perspectives and actually talking about it like, is so powerful without even changing anything. So the greater the maximal purpose, the greater the maximal power to exist, because so just something about where because this is entity is the source of its own existence, or this applies just a step where this entity is this. Okay, so you're suggesting I put that in there somewhere somehow. I'm going to take note on that. Um, I'll just put the note here. This entity is source of own existence. Okay, I'll make this the kind of size that'll keep my attention. Well, that's fine. I'll make it like the first thing on this page. Well, that's too big to even read. What am I thinking? Bold. We'll just give it a stupid color so that I'll notice it. There we go. So I've taken note on that. I appreciate that. I'm going to see how I want to incorporate that or how I want to account for it. So, so we got to the bottom of why I say those are false equivocation, and we got to the definition of purpose and where that sits in my worldview. But my worldview is not really part of this argument. It's more that this argument is like a primer to then arguing my worldview, if that makes sense.
So I think that adding that in would make your argument stronger, but I think you would need to add additional things as well, you're saying that it's exempt from this, the problem of hypothetical maximality versus the actual maximality, because it is its own source of its own existence. But I'm not sure how that actually
Well, I'm
exempts it.
saying it being the source of its own existence is why the other analogies are false equivocation. And the reason for that, the reason that that's true, is that this entity, this hypothetical entity, is hypothetically the source of its own existence. And then because it's the source of its own existence, as we change the hypothetical, we're changing that relationship and we can improve our hypothetical to one that's more likely to really exist. So, I mean, do you follow me so far?
I still don't see how you can
So the
connect
idea
the
argument
power
is
of
just
its own existence to more likelihood.
okay. Well, I mean,
Like
Because hmm,
Like hypothetically, you could
you're
have
saying
this thing that just created harmony without a mind, and hypothetically, you could have this thing that has a mind that created a harmony and existence and purpose. Um,
well, I think
how
I
do we
finally
know
actually
which is
got
more
the
likely?
response. I think I actually finally have the response. Is that my argument here is that there is no hypothetically more likely, and so I mean, if this isn't really like how I want to like present the argument per se, but I can concede that all this argument does is try to come up with the hypothetical that's the best hypothetical. And then I say, well, since it's the best hypothetical, you have good reason to think this one instead of another one. So yeah, I think I can agree that all I'm getting to is doing my best to have the most likely hypothetical. But I feel good if it's the most likely one. I mean, that's how I win the argument, isn't it?
Sorry, what was that last sentence?
Isn't that how I would win the argument? Like if someone says, "Well, I think it's hypothetically this," and then I say, "I think it's hypothetically that," and then I make a better argument for that, then I win the I win the argument. So it's just
Well,
about the most likely hypothetical.
yeah. So
Because
how
what
do
can I do
we?
besides get the most likely hypothetical? What else can I do?
So if we have one hypothetical, both of them are the source of their own existence, but one has an intelligence and the other does not have an intelligence. How does having intelligence make one more likely than the other?
Because the one that has intelligence can have more purpose and more harmony, and harmony is coexistive power. And if it has more coexistive power than the other one, more power to exist, then it's the more likely of the two.
But why?
I just gave, I think, my best explanation in words. So,
But so I think what was your definition of power to exist is just harmony, right?
yeah, I might have tried to prove that harmony is the power to exist. Yeah, that's step 6. So,
In the sense that it's like basically it won't be eliminated, right?
yeah, that might be a better approach for me to take than describing the concept of measuring something immeasurable. I think this is the one that I did the worst job making clear for people because then I realized if you measure harmony, people are going to think that's computational power. And so then I had to make a point B that's incredibly like convoluted in order to be like, I mean, at least sounds convoluted, just to specify that we're not talking about computational power. We're talking about coexistive power as quantitative measure of power to exist. So that's a description. So I actually could just leave it at that. Point B is more like just a note. It's not actually part of the proof. So here's where I get to where I describe that the measure of harmony is best described as quantitative measure of power to exist. So what do you think of that?
It's just defining terms, so I guess I don't. The only possible
Well,
problem
yeah,
is
you have
if
opinions
you
about the
if
definitions. My definitions could be manipulative or something. I could be playing word games. So
yeah,
I
I mean
mean,
the only
yeah.
problem might be if you tend to equate the phrase power to exist with likelihood rather than harmony.
Okay, so I think that definitely is sort of what I'm doing there. I say definitely, but let me see if it is. Yeah, if something has more power to exist, but then I'm talking about a hypothetical more power to exist, and you're saying that's not necessarily the same as a hypothetical more likely to exist. But that's sort of
Well, the measure
yeah,
of
like you said I defined my terms so that that's not the case. So then maybe you don't like my definition of terms because yeah, that's because my definition of terms is that is whatever has more. Well, yeah, because that would make the step about power to exist unnecessary if I'm actually having to just like go backwards with it. It's as if I'm trying to skip it. Because if I'm just going to be like, well, the power to exist is based on harmony, and the harmony connects to later in the argument. But then, so I guess if I'm talking about more likely, then maybe I should discuss likelihood more and make sure I carry that through with clarity more to help me keep on exactly what I mean so that people can follow it.
I mean, I don't think you really need to define power to exist here because I don't see you use it really. I mean, maybe you do use it later on. But if you're mixing.
Maybe I would need an extra step to say to prove why power to exist is likelihood.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, that's the crux of the whole thing is whereas why does having more harmony make this one cause to the universe more likely?
Yeah, so let me ask you, like, would you not associate coexistive power and more of that with a greater likelihood to exist if we're just like talking back from hypothetical?
Uh, no, because the maximal level of coexistence might be relatively low, whatever that means. Versus some hypothetical which has more power, more coexistence, more harmony. I don't think one is more likely than the other just by virtue of having more coexistence. I think one is better than the other, but
See, I
that's a different
definitely,
argument.
I definitely think it's more likely. I mean, we're talking about more quality to coexist. So aren't we sort of by definition existence likely to exist? I mean, am I missing something here? Do I not know what we're talking about?
Well, I mean, there might be more coexistence. We could have a hypothetical universe where there is more coexistence, but does that make it likely to exist?
One more time?
We could imagine a universe that has more coexistence in it, but that doesn't make it more likely to exist.
Well, I mean, all this is beyond our imagining, but I'm not gonna like harp on that. I see what you're getting at, and no, that I would think that I would say that you are once you're having making a hypothetical that has more coexistive power, you are proposing the more likely hypothetical. So I don't agree with you.
But why is more harmony more likely?
Why is more? Well, because it is coexistiveness. So existence is, existence is being. So more existenceness is more being. And the only reason we don't have everything existing is, that there's
Well, it's
the
like
reason we don't have everything existing is because there is mind in it. But there's mind, it's likely that there's mind in it. I mean, that makes sense because it increases these likely elements. So I guess I'm getting a little bit circular here. Maybe we should focus on this point for a minute and see if I can iron it out or if you got me.
so it's like if there were more people coexisting on the earth, say 300 trillion people on earth, that's more coexistence versus than the 9 billion we have today, or however much it is
Well,
now.
that's a very materialistic way of looking at this, but this is far beyond material. Like, we're not talking specific. I mean, this includes every abstract that's ever existed. I mean, logic, reason, math, all those things.
But how
So
does that?
we're not talking about. That's what I said here about in B, the part where I say it's not equivocal to processing power. That's sort of what you were just talking about. Like, more people to exist, yeah, that would take more processing power, but that's not really what I mean by um, coexistiveness. Um, I mean, that is the more physical coexistiveness, but we're talking on an abstract, deep, fundamental level. We're not talking on an empirical level.
But how do we know that it's anything other than an assertion to say that more harmony is more likely?
How do we know it's anything other than an assertion?
Yeah.
Um, more harmony is more likely. And we're based on the same definitions I'm using here.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, at some point, everything has to come down to one's own experience and intuition. And so, I think I've done pretty solid here. So maybe I'm, yeah, I mean, my intuition finds it very hard to have the same problems you have. Like, these things are, I mean, that maybe I would like to say that it's by definition in the argument. So then again, maybe you don't like the definition of harmony. So um, I'm just all over the place here on the screen. Sorry, guys. Measure of harmony. Let's describe. So what question are we on again? What are you asking me?
Well, I think that you might be doing this, whereas you're saying harmony is the power to exist, but you're also saying likelihood is the power to exist. And you're kind of bridging them that way.
No, I'm saying what has more power to exist is more likely to exist. So it sounds like maybe I've not done a good enough job of articulating that or proving that. And I mean, maybe that's just another one of those presuppositions where I'm like, well, if someone is hearing this argument and they hear me say that more power to exist makes something more likely to exist, then for them they should be like, well, that's a good way of looking at it. So that means that I find this argument stronger. So it might just be as simple as that. Like, it might just be that because it's a good presupposition, it strengthens the argument, and that maybe another presupposition that that a hypothetical with more power to exist is more likely to exist. So that might be a presupposition here. Is that a problem?
Yeah, if you're defining power to exist as a state of harmony, because then you're using two different definitions and equating them through the same phrase.
Okay, so then the question is if I ever justified doing that, which is where we were sort of at a minute ago. And okay, the measure of harmony is best described as quantitative measure of power to exist. So yeah, the problem is that I am not proving this. I'm using this to prove harmony is the power to exist. So is this point A something strong that I want to use? Let me see. Measure of harmony, that's based on this definition, is best described. Yeah, you see what this is doing is it's sort of clarifying the deep abstract context of the entire argument. So maybe if you're not in the same deep abstract that I'm in, that's why you've approved of these things, because you weren't really looking at it the same as I was. But I think that this 6A kind of establishes what the depth of the argument is, so that Yeah, and I'll leave an add here, and is thus more likely. Anyways, power to exist, or to exist and so correlates, I hope I'm using the right word there, with likelihood to exist. And then yeah, this sort of like sets that, yeah, it's not just about counting particles or something, but it gets to something deeper here. And you know, we are talking about something that's very deep and abstract. So I think, you know, if someone's going to try to make the best proof without using abstractions, they're going to fail. And so I don't really feel bad that, you know, logical syllogisms aren't necessarily supposed to be abstract, but if I'm going to use a logical syllogism about something abstract, you know, I've got to bridge it. So I've got to interface the two is what I mean, not bridge it. I've got to interface the abstract with the syllogism.
Well, would you rather say the measurement of harmony is best described as a quantitative measure of likelihood? Is that kind of what you're trying to say?
But no, I think the way I worded it here is good. I think when I add and so correlates with likelihood to it, you know, the measure of harmony is best described as quantitative measure of power to exist. You see, and that's the thing is it's not quantitative. I'm completely wrong there. I was trying to quantify something that's not actually about quantity. And then that lets me delete this whole point here too. And that really cleans it up some. I mean, I don't know if it cleans it up for you, but it cleans it up for me. So, okay, the measure of harmony is best described as measure of power to exist, and so correlates with likelihood to exist. So then an increase would have correlate with an increase, just to elaborate a little bit. So, I mean, you can disagree with this, but before we get to whether or not you disagree, do you have any thoughts on my edits?
Let me see what you cut out. It is likely that greater harmony results in patterns which serve to simplify a system.
Well, that was sort of to keep from having an exception brought in. So I took out B altogether, yeah.
I mean, you might want to keep it because it kind of describes what harmony is doing.
Oh, you think so? Because I think once I took out quantity, then that sort of took out the idea of measuring computational power. And what I had there in B was like, I think it really bogged things down. Why do you think it should still be in there?
It's
because I took out the word
just kind of when you say simplify a system, it might help people understand what you're saying. But okay, it's not that relevant. I don't think it's necessary, but
pattern. It is likely that greater results in patterns which then serve to simplify a system. Well, I could use this just to talk about how it's not quantitative. I could take out all this stuff about computational power.
Sure.
So that would be a lot better. So this measure does not correlate with quantity. As much as with quality. So I don't know, I'm doing this on the fly. I don't know how I'm doing here, but let's see. So I'll go ahead and read point 6 in its entirety. Harmony is the power to exist. A, the measure of harmony is best described as measure of power to exist, and so correlates with likelihood to exist. B, it is likely That greater harmony results in patterns which then serve to simplify a system. So, this measure of harmony does not correlate with quantity as much as with quality. So what do you think of that, my frenemy?
So does power to exist just mean how much harmony there is? Is that all it's referring to?
Yeah, it's a description of power to exist is. So this is very much a clarifying point. Yeah, so that the context is clear.
Like the more
So
harmony there is, the more.
I use the word described. So by using the word described, I'm actually telling the reader or the listener that I'm offering them clarity, if that makes sense, because it's a description, right?
So the more harmony there is, the more power to exist there is, because the more things are coexisting, right?
Well, it's not quantity. That's exactly what the next thing specifies, is that it's quality more than quantity.
Well,
So yeah, this one really needed refining so that I'm making my definitions clear.
yeah, I mean, because a measure is kind of quantitative.
Yeah, but using a measure and then saying it's not quantity sort of helps us get to the abstract, you know? Because I mean, we live in a physical world, but I'm talking about things deeper than where we live. So I have to use, you know, but
and maximal is a quantitative as well.
Well, what's the qualitative version of the word maximal? Or maybe I want to use quantitative words for something that's not quantity, and that helps me bring clarity to the discussion.
I don't think it's really a problem because you don't have like precise units by which you're measuring the quantities, but I don't think that's part of this yet.
Yeah, I think using quantity language for non-quantities helps to clarify.
Because you are saying that there is
stuff like that where it uses words differently than, you know, and then that really clarifies, like where people think there's contradictions in the Bible. That's not really what those are. That's really like extra clarity is actually what's going on there. So like one could say, I say it's maximal, I say it's a measure, then I say it's not quantity. Well, I'm not contradicting myself. I'm bringing in clarity.
I think a lot of people would think that those contradictions are more confusing, but different topic, I guess.
It could be the same, depending on what you feel like talking about.
So, but you are saying there can be greater and lesser harmony, though, right? Or more or less?
Well, there can hypothetically, we can talk about more or less harmony, but I mean, there's only one reality, so I don't think there actually can be.
Purpose, the way you define it, is increasing harmony, right?
Yeah, and I think the exact words I use are pretty good. We can just go to that real quick. Wait, where did I put oh, maybe it's actually the next step.
Yeah.
I would have thought it was earlier in this. Yeah, purpose exists. Purpose, did I already talk about purpose earlier without saying it exists?
I think you went over it.
No, it looks like I never, yeah, okay, so I did this right, because I don't want to start using purpose before I establish that it exists. So purpose exists. Purpose is the quality that a system of harmony will reach a greater measure of harmony.
So is that increasing harmony?
Or maybe I should say shall. Well, do remember that it is increasing, but it's not in time. Like none of this is temporal. So when it says it shall, that's an eternal shall. It's not a temporal shall. And I don't know if I need to specify that. I mean, I don't think so.
Well, I mean, reaching it from what point? It seems like a temporal thing. Like from a
Oh no,
from
there's
an
order.
eternal perspective, the harmony's already there, but from a temporal perspective, it's going from one and then finally reaching this point of greater harmony, right?
Well, it's a matter of order. So I'm not talking about chronological order. I'm talking about abstract order or a spiritual order, such as maybe like logical order would be sort of in that category, right? So yeah, so it is order, but it's not necessarily a temporal order. Now, I mean, my personal understanding is that it is going to increase with time. You know, once we get the whole seed growing and stuff. You know, this whole seed of the eternal universe and all that, because we're in a seed phase right now of existence. But yeah. So my personal view is that it increases with time, but the argument is outside of time. It's addressing order.
But would an order change over time?
Um, well, that's not what I don't mean order as in like the way of things. So I don't mean the world or the way things are or anything. What I mean by order is like A, then B, then C, then D, you know, one, then two, then three. But we're not talking about counting, and we're not talking about listing, because as listing the alphabet or as counting numbers, right? We're not talking about those orders. We're not talking about the order of time, that time has an order. We're talking about the fundamental order, just order itself.
So when is it of a lesser measure of harmony?
When?
Yeah, or where, or
Um, it would be of less measure of harmony at preceding. Okay, so the order is specifically in context of the mind. You know, I mean, I'm calling it the mind, but it's in the specifically in the context of whatever assessments are relevant to this exact topic. So when I said it was just the order, that's not exactly right, because I'm saying that it's a system of harmony shall reach greater measure of harmony. So the thing is that this system is outside of time. And so the order is the order of this system that I'm talking about, but we're not talking about a system of time, or we're not talking about it from a temporal perspective. So it's the order of that system shall reach greater measure of harmony. But I mean, maybe the argument's still strong if I attach time to it. I just think this is a little more fundamental than time is.
okay. Um, I'm not sure if that's that relevant to my objections.
Okay, so what's going on?
Well, I still object to, like, I'm still trying to understand what you're saying with what an increased or a greater measure of harmony is, but where I object to is when you say that the measurement of power to exist correlates with likelihood to exist. So that's like the main problem still.
Okay, so I was back here where I changed things. So the measure of harmony is described as measure of power to exist, and so correlates with likelihood to exist. Yeah, and with this one, I'm just going to be like, if you think this makes the argument weak, then go ahead and think my argument is weak because I think reason would consider this to be strong. And I can only really address reason. I can't really address that which doesn't have very good intuition for reason. You know what I mean? I want to be very clear that, like, I think this is on an intuitive level, but yeah, I'm really looking to appeal to intuitions of reason, not to intuitions of objecting to reason.
Well, I don't. The point of a syllogism isn't to have intuitive conclusions. It's a logical format.
Well, the intuition comes in where does the person think that I have. I mean, I didn't make this to quote unquote make a syllogism, so I don't even know if it is a syllogism or. I mean, I just took that approach to try to do my best to make something clear to the people I'm talking to. So, I mean, if it's not exactly a syllogism anymore, that I'm not concerned about. But I am concerned about appealing to reason. And so, like, showing those who support reason and like to lean into reason, they'll see the strength of this argument, and so it's done a good job. Because there's nothing you can do to convince those who, their intuition is against reason. I mean,
but if it's reasonable, you can give a reason why those two are connected in a syllogistic form. So I still don't see how you can say that it correlates to likelihood.
Well, these are such abstract things that we don't observe, so I don't understand how I'm just not aware of how I could make some kind of syllogistic point to strengthen that. Power to exist correlates with likelihood to exist. I mean, when I think about that, and I think how would I prove that, I get images of like physical things in my head, like physical science, and there's no physical science I can do to back this up. So I think we just have to let whoever is reading it or whatever judge for themselves on this point, because it seems like it would need a scientific backup, and that's not possible.
So it's not possible to back up that point?
Well, not with science, and...
Well, then there's no reason to believe it unless it's unreasonable to believe it.
Well, yeah, I mean, intuition, reasonable intuition would totally agree with it. So I guess that's a reason outside of science.
But what's reasonable about an intuition?
Well, the way the mind works, the brain is a harmonic device and truth is harmonic. And so the brain wants to tend towards truth. And because of the devil in us, we put walls up and limits against that truth flowing through us. So our intuitions, they're from a truth device, a harmonic device. And so our intuitions have a lot of validity. And I've been alive for 36 years, after 36 years of using my intuition and my subconscious, my conscious, my articulate intelligence, my abstract intelligence, getting better at it over time and stuff. Like, I have experience empirically tested. I've tested it over and over and over of how good my intuition works relative to what's around me. And so unless I'm going to fall into solipsism, I'm pretty good with saying like intuition is a valid thing. I've tested it. But that's if someone has good intuition. And if they don't, then we have to go back to helping them get better intuition. We have to kill the devil in them and teach them the truth.
Your intuition has never been wrong?
I'm not saying it's never been wrong. I'm saying that like it has validity. Like sometimes we can be really sure of something and sometimes we're not as sure of something, like if I wanted to go throw a rock at the refrigerator in the kitchen, I would be sure I would succeed. But if I wanted to throw a dart at a bullseye, I would not be sure I would succeed. So, I mean, this is like I'm throwing a rock at the fridge, This isn't like difficult intuition to... I don't think so anyway. So I have a lot of confidence in this intuition. I think it's an easy hit, 6A.
But confidence doesn't mean anything. Flat earthers are confident.
Well, I'm just being honest with you. Like, yeah. I'm just honestly disagreeing with you.
But you said that there's a difference between rational intuition and irrational intuition, but there's a way to check that, which is with logic and rationality. So you can't
But
just rely on an intuition. You have to be able to confirm it outside of just what I think that it's true. Just having confidence doesn't mean anything.
no, when confirmation's impossible, we can only do our best. And so, yeah, that's the best.
If confirmation's not possible, then it's not reasonable because it has to have a reason to be reasonable.
Well, no, I mean, like
you might be right, but you don't have a reason for it. You're just kind of a lucky guess.
Well, I mean, I think you're using the word reason as if it's the word proof or whatever, like nothing is reasonable unless it's proven. And I think everything's in context, in a context where we know that we don't have any sure answer, then we can do our best, and then we can be like, well, is this the best? So it seems like sometimes we're just falling back to that. It's like we're just falling back to, if someone has a better idea of what's likely the source of existence, then I'd like to hear it, and we can sort of pit them against each other for a battle. But I'm not sure that if you need it to be stronger here, I don't think I'm ready to make it stronger here. But I am willing to pit it up in a fight against another idea,
I just think that it is going to fall a little flat because you don't have a reason to connect the maximal harmony with likelihood to exist. It just seems like you just are asserting that and expecting some people to agree and some people to not agree.
Okay.
But if you could point to a reason why I should agree, then it would be at least minimally reasonable.
So I'm writing here, express reason. I want to write better express reason for likelihood. So, yeah, I mean, that's good advice. I'm on my feet right now at the moment. I don't have anything for you. But, I mean, also being honest, I still feel like I have something strong here. I've been hearing your feedback and stuff, and, I think it's like you poke a couple little holes in a kite with a needle, and it's still going to fly just fine. I don't think you've quite, slashed through it or something. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely a little hole poked in my kite, and you've poked a few of them in. I'm just giving you my opinion. So yeah, you can give your opinion. I mean, maybe we should just start wrapping up what we both think and agree to disagree. Because
yeah, I think we can think on some of these things for a little while and come back to it as we plan.
Yeah, and I'll try to get myself to prioritize preparing some kind of argument about was the snake right.
Okay.
So,
but yeah, I think this point is really the linchpin of your argument. Like it lives and dies on this point.
Well, that's interesting because it's like from your perspective, it lives and dies on this point. But like from my perspective, that's such a strong point that's like a way of saying it lives on this point. I mean, that's what it kind of sounds like to me, But I do totally hear you that. Excuse me, my throat. Yeah, I totally hear you that from your perspective, you can, based on your intuition and assessment and how all that comes together, so that if I wanted to make a strong argument towards someone with a similar perspective to yours, then I would want to address that better.
Yeah, because if you could convince me that the more maximal a purpose, the more likely it is, then I think we would be on the same page.
Yeah, and then I could try to get you on another page and another page, and yeah. So I mean,
as far as points 1 through 11, I think.
Yeah, I follow you, and then once I've got you on points 1 through 11, and of course, at that point, I think you'd be being gracious about my choice to use the word Yehovah because you're not necessarily agreeing it's the same Yehovah of the Bible, even if we do get there.
Mm-hmm.
So am I understanding that right? Let's say I did fix that and I got you here to point 11. Then you say you're with me, but my conclusion is Yehovah is. I mean, would you actually be with that?
I mean, that's how you define it. So that's
So
just
you
your usage of the word. But as far as like the concept that I would be agreeing with, I would just be agreeing with some deity exists, kind of some intelligent deity, and then you
okay?
connecting that to the Bible would be another step. But yeah,
Yeah, very good. So I really appreciate this discussion. I mean, it's been over 2 hours, just the part that was you and me discussing, and I really appreciate that so many people have stuck with us.